You mentioned the trio of McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes. In terms of who will be the biggest challenger this weekend for Red Bull, who would you put your money on of those three teams?
McLaren, I think, quite comfortably. This isn't quite the same type of circuit as Suzuka in terms of high speed, but it's got a lot of that high and medium speed corners here. And you would expect, and that was one thing McLaren said to us earlier in the year when they introduced this upgrade, was they looked at the makeup of the season and they said, well, if our weakness is slow speed corners, then that is a problem, but there's less of that on the calendar than there is medium and high speed. And we saw at Suzuka just how strong that car is. And also you have Lando and Piastri who are performing really, really well as well. So I think add all that together, I think McLaren are going to be strong again. But again, it is interesting as well because with Mercedes, I feel like you can never really work out where they are. And then we saw that step up from Ferrari as well. So the Friday, and this is a quirk of the sprint race format, we only get one practice session this weekend before qualifying. So I feel like that, especially with the tire degradation you mentioned earlier, it could actually be quite a mixed up grid on Friday evening. I really like that format because you only really get an hour to understand the car and to work out your setup. So while I think McLaren will be strong, I can see the grid being a little bit of a mix behind Max Verstappen probably, but a bit of a mix nonetheless.
Okay, my follow-up then would be who has a stronger weekend between Ferrari and Mercedes?
I'm going to say Ferrari. I think if you look at Ferrari's trajectory recently, yeah, they've been building, and Lawrence hit the nail on the head on the last show. They've also made clear improvements with the upgrades they brought to the car, but I think operationally as well, Ferrari is just that they're in a much better place they were a year ago, and I think you're starting to see the results of that. You're starting to see that they're not making the same mistakes they were on strategy. I think they're seizing opportunities in a better way than they were before. Sainz is performing really well at the moment, and I think Charles had a bit of a kick up the backside in Japan and was fourth. And I think you can tell he's kind of, he's back in the game, or hopefully he's back in the game. So I would just edge it to Ferrari just based on recent form.
We mentioned Liam Lawson earlier, and I just want to point out that he will be racing for AlphaTauri in Qatar. That was one of those dates that were circled possibly for Daniel Ricciardo to make his return. We were hopeful, but they also said that there's no need to push this. So now we are looking for Daniel Ricciardo to make his return to the grid in COTA, or in Austin at COTA. So what can you tell us about this? No surprise here that we're not going to see Danny Rick.
Yeah, and it was the date they originally wanted to come back, as you say. But I think that now that we know Ricciardo's in the car next year, and that we know that Lawson isn't in the car, and that we know that Perez is in Red Bull, as we mentioned, there's no rush coming back. It's not like he's got only a few races to prove whether he can replace Perez or anything. Everything's lined up for him. So I think Red Bull are like, you impressed us in the first two races back in Hungary and Belgium. There's no point us rushing it. He loves Austin as well. I think he's going to come into that race, just in a really good place. Austin loves him. He's one of the most popular drivers in America. And I feel like, and we've talked about this before, haven't we, quite a lot. And we even talked about it with him at the start of the year at the Red Bull launch. But Ricciardo, I feel like, unlike so many other drivers, is massively, his happiness is really key to how he performs. I know that sounds really stupid, but some drivers, you feel like they can drive, when they aren't in a great place. Ricciardo, you need him to be in that special place. And I think in Austin, coming back from what sounds like he's been in quite, not a bad place in terms of, really, really negative, but I think he was pretty bummed out by the way that all happened. He was on such a high going to Zandvoort. I think coming back to Austin, it just makes sense for everyone. And I think AlphaTauri have got some 2024 announcements, losing track of the years already. Katie is terrible. To come in Austin in terms of what their team is going to be called, what it's going to look like going forward. Because obviously we know Red Bull's selling the name of the team next year. So I think him coming back just adds to that. So I think everything's just come together to a point where they're like, let's give Lawson one more race. Let's make sure you're 100% when you come back. And then everyone's happy in Austin, except sadly, Liam Lawson, who I think is going to be a bit bummed out.
I know, because talk about somebody seizing an opportunity and really showing what they can do with it. So hopefully he's earned himself some goodwill in the future should an opportunity present itself. I think he'll be a lot of people's first call based on the way that he's performed over these last few races.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.